It appears that the chances of a Marvel vs. Capcom 4 are next to impossible, meaning I'm screwed unless something ridiculous happens. Hindsight is a bitch. Hey guys, it's the Metal Blade 5, and despite all odds, there is actually going to be a fourth Marvel vs. Capcom game. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. As I've wanted to play a Marvel vs. Capcom game for so long, this announcement got me extremely hyped, along with Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 coming to the PS4. With the game being planned for release this year, and the insane amounts of wish lists and character suggestions over the internet, I thought that similar to what I did with Injustice 2, I'll make a countdown of the 5 characters I want to see the most. However, with both the Marvel and Capcom universes possessing a wide variety of characters to choose from, I've basically combined 2 top 5s into one. First, I'll be going over my top 5 Marvel characters, and then my top 5 Capcom characters, with explanations for why I want to see them in the game, and what their potential movesets could be. As for the criteria for this list, the character simply has to be someone who has never been playable in any of the previous Marvel vs. Capcom games, as well as being someone who, in my opinion, has at least a decent chance of making it into the game. Also, in regards to the rumor that X-Men and Fantastic Four characters won't be in the game, or only as DLC due to being owned by Fox, while this hasn't been confirmed at the time of this video, I won't be including any Fox-owned characters on this list just because of the uncertainty of whether they'll make it in or not. Lastly, just let people who are watching this in the future know, at the time of this video being recorded, the only confirmed characters on the Marvel side are Iron Man, Captain Marvel, and Captain America, while the only confirmed Capcom characters are Ryu, X, and Morrigan. So if any of the characters on this list are confirmed or deconfirmed, don't go call me an idiot in the comments. I wouldn't have known this when this video was uploaded. Moved out of the way, let's get to it! Scarlet Witch. But wait, Metal Blade! You said you weren't including X-Men characters! Well, yes, but I see Scarlet Witch having a much higher chance than the rest of the X-Men characters because of the MCU, which probably plays the biggest factor in deciding the Marvel roster. Now, this entry was a toss-up between Scarlet Witch and Loki, because I feel like their powers would give them similar playstyles. But I opted to go with Scarlet Witch because Loki isn't much of a fighter. If Scarlet Witch did end up becoming a playable character, I could picture her as having a drastically different fighting style compared to a lot of other characters in the Marvel vs. Capcom series. I would view her as being a sort of trickster character, in which she'd be much more technical and have a lot of her moves involve messing and manipulating with the opponent. Sort of like Quan Chi in Mortal Kombat. This is because, as anyone who is familiar with Scarlet Witch knows, her primary power is that she can bend reality to literally distort time and space. For example, if she was about to be attacked, she could change reality to one in which she doesn't get hit. As such, I feel that her powers could be implemented into a fighting game in various ways. For example, she could possess moves such as teleportation in order to dodge attacks and sneak up behind the opponent. As for Scarlet Witch's attacks, her special moves could involve powers like levitation and player manipulation in order to keep the opponent away from her, as well as keeping the opposing player guessing as to what you are going to do next. And going off of the MCU, Mind Control could also be a possibility for one of her specials or hyper combos to cause various effects, such as possibly reversing the opponent's controls, or maybe, going back to the Quan Chi comparison, forcing the opponent to hit themselves. With these unique abilities, I think that Scarlet Witch could become a very interesting character to play as, but would require a lot of skill to master. However, the main reason why Scarlet Witch is only number 5 is because I've heard that despite being in the MCU and not in any of the Fox movies, Fox still has some say in the rights for Marvel to use both her and Quicksilver in other forms of media such as games. I don't know if this is true, but if it is, it could potentially limit her chances of making it into the game, similar to the other X-Men characters. Black Panther. Again, the obvious reason for why Black Panther is on the list is because of the MCU, but I think that he would be a really cool character to implement into the game. The main way I could see Black Panther working as a playable character is that he would be a very in-your-face type of character, in that the majority of his attacks will be very close range, in which he will have to get up close and personal to his opponents. However, Black Panther is also very agile, as he's practically an African ninja, so he would most likely be a very fast character that can pull off a lot of acrobatic maneuvers. The main reason why I see Black Panther as a close-range fighter is because of his primary weapons being the vibranium claws on his suit, which could give him almost of a Wolverine and Felicia crossover moveset, involving a lot of clawing attacks and dash attacks, with potentially some grappling moves that would also involve clawing at the opponents. Along with being potentially fast and acrobatic, as I mentioned earlier, Black Panther could be a character that has a very high combo potential, and seeing some of the insane combos used in Marvel vs. Capcom tournaments, I think Black Panther would be a good fit for competitive play. Now, some may think that Black Panther's moveset would be very predictable and limited due to only involving his claws, and when going off of Captain America Civil War, that would seem to be the case. However, in other forms of media, Black Panther possesses other abilities that can be used for reference. In the comics, one of Black Panther's powers is superhuman senses and reflexes, which I could see being worked into his moveset in some way, such as giving him counters or dodging attacks. Also, in the Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes cartoon, which I've never seen aside from a few clips, Black Panther can use vibranium in other ways, such as creating some sort of pink glowing staff and other vibranium weapons which can potentially be incorporated into his moveset as well. The only reason why Black Panther isn't any higher is because within the MCU, we haven't seen too much of him, and this is before his own movie comes out, so as such, my knowledge on Black Panther is pretty limited. I've never even read the comics since I don't live near any shops that sell comic books, so finding other forms of information on them was pretty hard. But I do see Black Panther as being a guaranteed character for similar reasons as to why Captain Marvel is in the game, being that they both have movies coming out. Plus, if X-Men characters do end up in the game, then he could have some interesting interactions with Storm, considering that one thing I do know about Black Panther in the comics is that he's actually married to Storm. The Winter Soldier. Like with Scarlet Witch, this entry was yet another toss-up that was pretty tough for me to make. For number 3, I had it between the Winter Soldier and the Punisher, because I think that they would end up having similar movesets due to their focus on guns. However, I went with Winter Soldier because, once again, he's gotten a lot more notoriety due to the movies, while Punisher's only appearance in the MCU is in Daredevil, which I haven't heard as much about, and I haven't even seen because I don't have Netflix. But I would still like to see Punisher in the game. Similar to what I said about Red Hood in my Injustice 2 countdown, I imagine Winter Soldier being a projectile-focused character due to his use of guns, in which they could use different types of guns with different combos. For example, submachine guns could be used to rack up combos, and grenade launchers or sniper rifles to knock opponents back. However, Winter Soldier could also utilize a few melee attacks in his moveset, as his cybernetic arm grants him super strength, which could be used for heavy attacks and grabs. Furthermore, in the comics, the cybernetic arm is also capable of generating electromagnetic pulses, so some of Winter Soldier's moves or hyper combos could involve electrocuting the opponent or temporarily stunning them. Plus, like I also mentioned with Red Hood in my Injustice 2 countdown, Winter Soldier could also have some interesting interactions with Captain America because, you know, he's Bucky. In fact, Winter Soldier could be an interesting character to implement in the game purely because of his backstory, since it would be curious to see what route they would take him in the story mode. Would they make him brainwashed by Hydra or Russians and evil, or would they follow the route of the MCU and give Bucky his memories back and have him be more of a good guy or anti-hero? Winter Soldier would be a pretty cool villain to add to the game, as like with a lot of lesser known characters prior to the MCU, he has seen a lot more popularity, and if they did give Bucky a similar personal story to the Captain America movies, then we could see him go through some character development during the story mode, which is something that I haven't seen that much of in the story modes of a lot of other fighting games. Black Widow. This entire list is pretty much based on the MCU, since most of my experience with Marvel has been from the movies, and partially because of all the rumors saying the MCU will play a large part in deciding the roster, but those factors are particularly the case when it comes to Black Widow being on the list. Prior to Iron Man 2, I and a lot of other people had never heard of Black Widow before, but since then she's become much more popular due to being awesome, as well as the fact that tons of people want to see a Black Widow movie. And since Capcom appear to be listening to fan requests, as X was one of the most requested characters for a future Marvel vs. Capcom game, I could see Black Widow's having a pretty good chance of making it in. Of course, for her moveset, Black Widow would incorporate a lot of her secret agent training as a Russian spy into her fighting style for physical attacks and combos, along with guns like her dual pistols used for quick projectile attacks to chip off little bits of the opponent's health. However, within the comics, which was slightly tapped into in the movies, Black Widow also possesses various gadgets within her gauntlets, which opens the way towards giving her a much more diverse moveset. In the comics, her gauntlets include a grappling hook, knockout gas, tasers, explosives, and tear gas pellets, in which these could allow her to use various attacks during gameplay. Maybe she could even have a move to switch between these gadgets on the fly. Her grappling hook can be used to pull enemies towards her, or vice versa, to extend combos. The knockout gas and tear gas could be used to stun the opponent or prevent them from blocking. The tasers can obviously shock the opponent, and the explosives can be used for heavier attacks and to deal knockback. So while Black Widow wouldn't appear to have a very interesting moveset at first, incorporating her abilities in the comics could make her almost a jack of all trades, or potentially even a disruptor type of character, in which she's sent in to mess with the opponent by preventing them from performing a certain strategy or continuing a combo, and then switch back to the first character to gain the upper hand over the opposing player. Actually, if Black Widow was to have a playstyle similar to this, it would actually somewhat reflect her role in the comics with the Avengers, in which she acts as a bit of a supportive member of the group. And getting back to the MCU, once again, she would be an easy character to implement into the story due to her positions in the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D., considering all the crazy shit that's probably going to go down as the Marvel and Capcom universes collide. Especially if the theory about the mysterious figure at the end of the trailer being a fusion between Ultron and Sigma is true. Which I really hope it is. So once again, this is another character that has mainly been put on the list because of the MCU. But that isn't the only reason. Other reasons for why this character is number one, which both go hand in hand, is because of a certain character in a previous Marvel vs. Capcom game. And just because I really like this character, so I want him to appear in the game so badly. StarLord.
Who? StarLord, man. Legendary outlaw? Guys?
Not the biggest surprise, I know, seeing as how he's on a lot of other people's wish lists, but goddammit, StarLord is easily the Marvel character that I want to see playable above all others. As I said in my Why I Like Avengers Age of Ultron video, I love Guardians of the Galaxy. It is up there with the Avengers for one of my favorite movies, so naturally, I would like to see some representation of it in this game. Especially if they gave StarLord a personality similar to that of Chris Pratt's portrayal of him. Plus, Rocket was playable in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and that was long before the movie, so with the Guardians of the Galaxy being much more famous, and of course, because this game is planned to come out this year, which is also the same year that Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is coming out, it would make sense for the Guardians to have some bigger representation. And I think that putting the leader of the group in the game is the best way to do that. For StarLord's moveset, obviously his main method of attack would be his laser guns to keep distance from his opponents. However, when looking up StarLord in the comics for this video, I found that his guns also possess elemental properties, which can be incorporated into his moveset by giving him various projectile attacks of different elements. For example, they could give him a flamethrower attack, or even a paralyzing gun similar to Zero Suit Samus in Smash Bros. Also, since StarLord's suit is equipped with rocket boots that allow him to fly and travel through space, they could allow him to be more agile and even somewhat of an aerial-focused character. They could even be used for some anti-air attacks that cancel other players' air attacks. As for his hyper combos, I could see StarLord potentially using some charge blast similar to what we saw with X in the gameplay trailer. Or, if we're going off of the MCU, he could even summon the Milano to call in an airstrike, again, similarly to Zero Suit Samus. As a result, I could picture StarLord as having a somewhat similar playstyle to Rocket's in Ultimate, just with him not being really short. While if Rocket does return, I could see him being paired up with Groot instead, as like a tag team sort of thing. In terms of how StarLord could be implemented into the story mode, since the big new mechanic of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is the Infinity Stones, I think it's possible that the Guardians could be sent in to fulfill a similar role to the movie, in which they have to stop the Infinity Stones from falling into the wrong hands, such as the potential Ultron plus Sigma fusion, or maybe even Thanos if he makes an appearance as well. So, that that's it for all the Marvel characters. Well, they'll end up in the game or not, we'll just have to wait and see from this specific point in time. So now let's move over to the Capcom characters. Asura. Now, I've never played Asura's Wrath, and I haven't seen that much of the game, which is why he's only number 5, but when I heard of people requesting for Asura to be in this game, in which he appears to be one of the most requested characters, I instantly thought that it would be awesome to see him as a playable character as well. While Asura's Wrath appears to be Quick Time Events the game in regards to its gameplay, the game did receive DLC in which Asura actually fights Ryu and Akuma in the style of Street Fighter. So as such, Capcom already have the experience and resources to implement Asura into a 2D fighting game, which means that it shouldn't be very hard to add him to Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. As for Asura's moveset, along with giving him the moves he had in the Street Fighter DLC, I would imagine that from what I have seen of Asura's Wrath, that Asura would be a very powerful character in terms of his attack strength, but will most likely be slow for balancing purposes. For some of Asura's combos, I could easily picture him delivering a flurry of punches towards the opponents with his multiple arms in the style of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and maybe even his hyper combos could include the QuickTime icons for aesthetic effect. From various bits I've seen of Asura's Wrath, I've noticed that the number of arms he has changes. So as such, I thought of a potential ability Asura could have, in which over time, or for using a certain move, Asura could grow more arms to make his attacks more devastating and raise his combo potential. However, through taking damage, he would lose these arms and would need to grow them again in a sort of risk versus reward strategy. But the biggest reason why I think Asura would be an awesome addition to Marvel vs. Capcom universe is because of how extremely powerful he is. I mean, the dude is a demigod who has been able to defeat beings larger than planets. So imagine him squaring off with the likes of Thor and Hulk. In fact, with all of the incredibly powerful Marvel villains like Galactus, it would make a lot of sense to add Asura to give a character with a similar or possibly even stronger power level on the Capcom side of the roster. The only concern I really have in regards to Asura's chances of making it in the game is the fact that despite him being a highly requested character, Asura has only been in one game, which also has some stigma attached to it due to Capcom making the rest of the story and the final boss DLC. So as such, Asura isn't really as well known as a lot of other Capcom characters. Dimitri. Dimitri is a Capcom character that I'm shocked as to how he's never been playable in Marvel vs. Capcom game before. Darkstalkers has received a good amount of representation in Marvel vs. Capcom. But despite being one of the main characters of the series, Dimitri has never been playable. Even the Mummy, Anarchus, was playable in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and I don't hear about him anywhere near as much as the most iconic Darkstalkers characters, which includes Dimitri. Dimitri was even playable in SNK vs. Capcom, another Capcom crossover fighting game, but not in Marvel vs. Capcom. In the plot of Darkstalkers, from what I know about it, since I'm not too familiar with the series, is that Dimitri and Morgan have an intense rivalry with each other due to the fact that Morgan's father, Belial, exiled Dimitri from the demon world to Earth. So to me, it makes way too much sense for Dimitri to be playable and reflect his rivalry with Morgan in-game through their pre-battle interactions and in the story mode. As for Dimitri's moveset, it would be a cinch to implement into the game because of the fact that Darkstalkers is basically Street Fighter, but with monsters and fairy tale characters making up the roster. As such, all Capcom needs to do is take Dimitri's moveset from Darkstalkers and put it in the game. Obviously, this would include Dimitri's iconic special moves like the Chaos Flare, Demon Cradle, Bat Spin, and Demon Blast. As for hyper combos, they just need to use Dimitri's super attacks or whatever they are in the game to fulfill that purpose. Now, on the subject of Dimitri's attacks, one issue I have heard in regards to implementing Dimitri in the game is that one of Dimitri's most iconic attacks, being his Midnight Bliss, might be hard to include on a technical level because part of the attack involves Dimitri transforming the opponent into a feminine and slightly cartoony version of himself. As such, this may be hard to do because of the game being in 3D and making new models for every character might be too much. I can understand that point, but seeing as how this game is kind of a reboot for Marvel vs. Capcom, it may mean that we might have a smaller roster which would mitigate this problem. Or, in the worst case, they may have to remove this part of the attack, seeing as how the transformation is purely cosmetic. I've heard that a lot of people want to see John Talbane, the werewolf, as a playable character, but in my honest opinion, I think Dimitri makes more sense because of his significant role in the plot of Darkstalkers, and I think the issues with Midnight Bliss shouldn't get in the way of him possibly being playable. Leon S. Kennedy. Similar to Dimitri, the reason why Leon is on the list is because of the major role he plays in the Resident Evil series. While Leon isn't as iconic as Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, he is one of, if not the most popular Resident Evil protagonists, and while his inclusion could result in him replacing Chris and or Jill, due to the fact that they would most likely have similar playstyles, I feel that since Leon is so popular, that it would be shocking to not see him at all in a Marvel vs. Capcom game. Leon was the protagonist of Resident Evil 2 and 4, which, from what I've seen, appear to be the two most well-received games in the series, and the most beloved amongst fans. So to me, it would make sense for them to receive some representation. For Leon's moveset, like I said before, I feel that he would play similarly to Chris and Jill in the previous games, because he would obviously use all of the different guns and weapons that were available in Resident Evil 2 and 4. And I guess 6 as well, but everybody says that game sucks. With Leon's main special moves involving projectile attacks with guns like his signature handgun, shotguns, a crossbow, and even some sort of electric gun called the Spark Shots when going off with the list of Resident Evil 2 weapons. As for Leon's hyper combos, I think that they would naturally involve the use of his guns that pack more of a punch, like the Gatling gun, Stinger missiles, and even the rocket launcher that he appears to have some sort of attachment towards. In terms of melee attacks, like with Chris, I think Leon would end up using melee weapons like the knife. But since Leon also used to be a police officer, they could potentially incorporate some police brutality into his fighting style, a bit like Stryker in Mortal Kombat. Furthermore, for a bit more of a unique move compared to the other Resident Evil characters, seeing as how the main method of healing in the games is through the use of herbs, maybe Leon could have a move in which he uses herbs to heal himself. Of course, this move would have a long recharge time so that players couldn't exploit it to constantly heal themselves. While I'm mostly unsure as to how likely Leon is to appear in the game because I could just as easily see Chris or Jill returning instead as the Resident Evil representative, I think that Leon's popularity and role in the series should at least place him on the table of consideration. Lady. Of course, Lady is higher than the other characters because she's from a Capcom series I've actually played, being Devil May Cry, but the main reason why she's on the list is for the sake of completion for me. When Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came out, we saw quite a bit of Devil May Cry representation as both Dante and Trish were playable characters, and later Virgil was added in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom. So for Infinite, why do we add the last of the main Devil Hunters to the roster? There is Nero, but I highly doubt that Nero is going to be in this game considering that nobody gives a shit about him, and was the main reason why a lot of people don't like Devil May Cry 4, even though I do. Speaking of Devil May Cry 4, with Lady finally becoming a playable character in the series thanks to the Special Edition, I think that it makes the chances of her appearing in Marvel vs. Capcom much greater since Capcom has an idea of how she would fight, aside from just firing her signature rocket launcher. In Devil May Cry 4, Lady also possesses dual pistols, which are somehow rapid fire, and a shotgun, which she can charge, which I can see as being part of her light and middle special moves respectively. As for the previously mentioned rocket launcher, it also comes equipped with a harpoon attached to it, which can allow Lady to copy Scorpion and let her opponents get over there, or use it to swing them around. Furthermore, in Devil May Cry 4, Lady also utilizes the harpoon part of her rocket launcher as part of her melee attacks, kind of like a knife, so it helps cover her melee attacks as well. As for the rocket part of the rocket launcher, like the shotgun earlier, it can be charged to deal massive damage to enemies. So as such, one of Lady's special moves could involve charging the rocket launcher to deal more damage, or use the fully charged version as part of a hyper combo. Also, Devil May Cry 4 allowed Lady to use her rocket launcher for a rocket jump attack, similar to that of the soldier in Team Fortress 2, which could be used as an anti-air, as well as being able to use a diving attack, where she smashes the rocket launcher into the ground, which creates an explosion. In terms of the story, seeing as how a lot of Dante's work comes from having to pay off Lady, she'll probably end up being the reason why Dante gets involved in the story. Assuming that Dante is also playable, which I think is an extremely safe guess. Just as long as they don't use DMC Dante in the game like they do with PlayStation All-Stars, I'll be fine with anything from the Devil May Cry side of things, since he is a prick, and the one reason why I don't even want to touch DMC. Now, this entry on the list was probably the hardest decision I have ever had to make when making a countdown. If I had known another Marvel vs. Capcom game was going to be announced, my number one Capcom character would actually be X. But he was the very first character revealed for the game, so I had to find a replacement. I had an idea for a specific Capcom character, but I was extremely unsure of their chances of making it into the game. But since I couldn't think of another Capcom character I wanted to see in the game more than this person, I decided to make them number one anyway. Rashid. The main reason why I want to see Rashid in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is because he's the closest thing I have to a main in Street Fighter V. I suck absolute balls at Street Fighter V. But when I started playing as Rashid, since he was one of the characters that interested me the most, I actually played pretty decently as him. I was actually able to pull off a lot of special moves very easily and able to perform some decent combos. So as such, I would like to see Rashid in the game because it means that there will be at least one character that I know I can be good as in the roster. For Rashid's moveset, like with Dimitri, it would be so easy to implement in the game because of the fact that the core gameplay of Marvel vs. Capcom is basically Street Fighter if you really think about it. Meaning that you could just give Rashid the same moveset he has in Street Fighter V, such as the Whirlwind Shot, Eagle Spike, and Spinning Mixer, with his EX moves and his super move, Altair, taking the place of his hyper combos. Plus, due to Rashid's fighting style of being fairly acrobatic and possessing good combo potential, I think that it would allow him to fit in Marvel vs. Capcom very nicely. Furthermore, his ability to control wind would be very beneficial in taking on superheroes and villains. As for the plots, while I actually have not got around to playing through the story mode of Street Fighter V, since the game keeps constantly updating on my PS4, I've heard that Rashid actually plays a pretty big role in the plot. So, for Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite's plot, they could give Rashid a somewhat similar role or story arc as to the one he had in Street Fighter V. But the reason why I was conflicted with putting Rashid on the list, and why I'm extremely uncertain of his chances of making it into the game, is that the idea I had of Rashid being playable came from the fact that Crimson Viper was playable in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 to promote Street Fighter 4, in which I thought that maybe one of the new characters in Street Fighter V could appear to promote that game in Infinite. However, out of all the new characters in Street Fighter V, I think Laura has the best chance since she's the most popular, for obvious reasons. Plus, the backlash Street Fighter V got for effectively being an unfinished game may mean that Capcom might ignore the game altogether. However, if a Street Fighter V newcomer does make it into Marvel vs. Capcom, I'll be hoping for Rashid of the Turbulent Wind.